Hey, that actually worked pretty well. I just recently read that the post office is actually having a lot of financial troubles, and well, my first thought was, what the fuck else is new? And next, I thought I'd go into why I think the post office should be either sold or just allowed to go bankrupt and go into the dustbin of history. It's been now when the United States was first established, we didn't have a private sector alternative. So at the time, so they enumerated the Congress to establish a post office, but that's a power that they were given. It doesn't mean that they have to do it. Now, it's kind of I'll go into more detail about that later, but a little bit of background. Apparently, the post office is losing billions every year. In the last 10 years, I read they've lost like 69 or 70 billion dollars, and they're currently in a 25 or 50 billion dollar hole right now, somewhere in that range. And Trump is refusing to bail them out because, the private sector is, while they're hurting, they're not going bankrupt. I mean, FedEx, UPS, right now they may not be making a profit, but they're still in the black. The post office has been in the red every single year for what, 10 years, maybe longer. And the fact of the matter is that costs us. I mean, it's an extension of the government. The post office is an extension of the government. It's an office of the government, basically. And it whenever they have a loss, who do you think pays for it? We, the taxpayer. If they have an $8 billion loss, which they did recently, I think it was in 2018, we pay for it. Now, if, FedEx had a multi-billion dollar loss like that, they would go bankrupt. So this is what we need to do. We have private sector alternatives. In fact, we've had private sector alternatives for over 100 years. The first one came with Linzanner Spooner in the 1800s. I think it was actually in the 1820s. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Linzanner Spooner offered the first private sector alternative to the post office, and he actually improved the post office with the competition, because at first, a stamp was like 10 cents, and then Linzanner Spooner came along and got it down to 3 cents in competition with the government. And then he actually improved on it further by delivering to your house. At the time, all the post office did, they had someone they would deliver the mail to the nearest post office, and you would have to go there and pick it up. When Xander Spooner's private sector alternative back in the 1800s delivered it right to your house. So the competition actually improved the post office. But, of course, the price of a stamp eventually got so low that the government did what it always does when it doesn't want to face competition. It illegalized the competition. It made it so that you can't drive down the costs so that way the government can maintain its profitability. It can maintain its higher costs. So the government basically did something that would be illegal in the private sector. It made it so that it can maintain its high cost monopoly, so to speak. But even so, with that advantage, the post office is losing billions of dollars every year, and they want another bailout. Well, I think it's time with FedEx, UPS, and all these services. I think it's time to just let the post office die. Either that or let them modernize. Let them get leaner. Let them get smarter. Let them function let them learn from UPS. Let them learn from FedEx. Let them function like a private sector company and make a profit, so that way we don't have to keep bailing their asses out. So I hesitate to say that because I know there's a lot of jobs on the line and a lot of people work at the post office, but at some point you need to, if it happens once or twice every, if it happens once a decade, maybe twice a decade because of a crisis, that's one thing. Certain government functions will run deficits. sometimes. But the fact of the matter is, this has been happening year after year after year after year after fucking year for 10, 20 years. They've been losing money every single year for the better part for more than a decade. So it's time to, since they have a proven track record of just losing money and hemorrhaging money, it's time to just let them die. Just let the post office go the way of the dinosaur, or sell it to the highest bidder. So that way it can, restructure and hopefully become a more profitable company and function on its own without help from the taxpayer. Because let me be clear, I hate bailouts. I think they're egregious. But this... And another thing is, you have to look at the Constitution itself. While the Constitution says it does give the Congress the power to create a post office, that doesn't mean that it has to. It's kind of like the Second Amendment. You as a private citizen have the power and the right to own a firearm. But does that mean you have to? Does that really honestly mean that you have to own a gun? Not unless you live in Kennesaw, Georgia. Kennesaw, Georgia is like one of the only city in America that I know of where the head of the household is legally required to own a gun. And ironically, they have one of the lowest crime rates in the country. I think now they only have a population of about 40,000 people, but they've only had 5 murders since 1980. Now that stat is like 5 years old. It might have changed since then. But yeah, they've only had like 5 murders since 1980. In Chicago, that you have more than that in one day. I mean, even if you adjust for the per 100,000, and you adjust the numbers and make it per 100,000, that's Kennesaw still comes out way ahead in terms of how good their numbers are because they have such a low murder rate. But that's a different argument entirely. But the point is, just because someone has the power to do something and they have the right to do so, that doesn't mean that they must. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to or you should. So in this day and age with private sector alternatives, I think it's time that the post office was just allowed to die and just disappear. That's all.